Today, we're going to talk about the future of education. We're going to talk about designing innovative curriculum. We're going to talk about and learn about the MIT Media Lab and the remarkable work that you did assembling that institution that has gone on to be quite prolific and profound in the creative talents that have emerged from there. And we're going to explore ideas about what is the future of learning and knowledge exchange. My name is John Cropper, and I'm the co-founder of the Latimer Fellowship Program, which we established about 3 years ago, funded by Bill Gates and Breakthrough Energy Ventures. And the program is basically modeled after the MacArthur Genius Award. We cultivate and develop Black geniuses. Normally about 100 applicants for our 10 spots. And in my prior life, I ran innovation for Aston Martin. I'm the son of an educator, and I have 5 uncles that are school teachers, and another one's a principal of a high school. And so my life's work is this. My life's work is about how we can accelerate high-quality learning and how we can democratize high-quality education.
Dope. Thanks for. I'm just happy to sit here and talk to you both. Same thing. I think my life's work is that. I have a funny story. My grandmother. I always remember the one thing that she was super happy about, and she just held with so much pride, was being the valedictorian of her high school class. Which is, a Black lady in the early 1900s. That's a big deal, right? In fact, the parent company of a symbol is it's called Magnolia Media Corporation after her, in remembrance of her. But yeah, man, similar, a symbol, founder, it's a tech platform, and we are creating online innovative curriculum for all schools. But I'm really excited that we get to take the great work that we can do as far as working with experts to design courses that are really relevant to industry in real time. And our thesis is if it's good enough for Harvard or MIT, then we can be very intentional and work with under-resourced schools so that all students have access to the best and brightest minds and kind of really take advantage of those 4 years in college. And there's so many things to do, whether it's going into the high school sector or, going forward with people after undergrad. So, yeah, I can't wait to chime in on this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm Nicholas Negroponte. I founded the MIT Media Lab, which was a place that artists and scientists could not just collaborate, but could cohabitate in the most intellectual and deep fashion, which grew to about 800 people at its peak. So it started very small and then became, if you will, a model for other places, and still today survives as a model for where innovation can happen because you not only harbor, but you encourage idiosyncratic thinking. You really want the oddball, you want the misfit, because people who are intellectual misfits are really usually the most interesting people.
Yeah. And look where we are now.
Yeah, I'm curious, Nicholas, if you could share the actual origin story. How did you arrive at the idea that there needs to be a citadel for imagination, bringing art and science together? How did it happen?
Well, it happened because of circumstance, to be honest with you. The founders of the field of artificial intelligence were my dearest friends. They were my peers. It was a bubbling side of computer science. And I was at the same time the academic head of the various arts departments at MIT, which included film and photography and environmental art. And we always attracted very strong people in those areas. So by having that collection, one day I said to myself and to the then president of MIT, let's build a place for this to happen as opposed to randomly and sporadically around campus and in little nooks and crannies. Let's build a lab and let's call it the Media Lab. And the reason we called it the Media Lab is because everybody else had used the word computers and communications, and at MIT you would just be another lab. And so that's how the Media Lab was born.
I guess we're probably talking 20 years or so ago. A book that changed the trajectory of my life. It's called Being Digital. Tell me about your ability to see around corners, because Being Digital is one of the most important seminal books that forecasted the future, and a lot of the things that you predicted in that book have come true.
Genie in the bottle.
Being Digital was, first of all, it was a collection of essays that were written for Wired magazine. So I happened to be the initial funder and, if you will, not directly but indirectly, a founder of Wired magazine, for which I wrote the back page each month, arguably to protect my investment. And I really enjoyed doing that. And one of the things I did at the end of each article is write 2 or 3 words about what the next one would be, which, since you had no real agenda, I write a title and then suddenly it came time to write the next one, and you wrote what you said you'd write. And they lent themselves to being, if you will, stapled together into a book. And the book, Being Digital, to my great surprise, became a bestseller and was translated into 40 languages, sold 1 million copies. It did very well. And it influenced people, which interests me the most, in ways that later they'd say, oh, it's so obvious. And that's, where we were going anyway. But it's nice to be obvious 20 years later. And I consider that a sign of accomplishment when what you do was obvious.
Yeah. I grew up reading Wired magazine too. Like coming from Mississippi, that was my foray into tech. Literally, Bloomberg was finance, and Wired magazine was the only. It's crazy how things come back full circle. But we were talking about like the funding around the Media Lab, right? And how hard you had to work to really pull this off before it was a known commodity or brand. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had a secret weapon when it came time to funding the Media Lab, and that is that my partner, person I did it with, happened to be the president of MIT. And my sort of advice to anybody starting something is get the president to be your partner. And that was into any place we wanted to go. He happened to be a very famous scientist and was Jack Kennedy's science advisor, was very connected. So I benefited an enormous amount from being able to ride on the coattails of somebody like that. And then you have to take advantage of what good fortune you get. And what I could tell people when I was raising money is I could look them in the eyes and say, I think you should do this. And by the way, I will do it. I will not only do it, you're going to watch me do it, and I will be accountable for it, and I'm just going to make this happen. And people like that. Some of the people who were very generous to us like 40 years ago would tell me, 20, 30 years later, we really feel good because not only did we support this idea, but you did it as you said you would do, and they would thank me. I should be thanking them, but they would thank me.
Yeah, everyone wants to be a part of something that's historical and successful. We were talking about our journeys, right? I know, like for me, I'm 36, and just raising capital, that has traditionally not been a thing that most minorities are successful at, right? And I just remember thinking of some of the stories you told, and I was thinking, look how much better off the world is because you were able to formulate and package all of these things and raise the capital and all the innovation that's came out of that media lab. And I know, being an entrepreneur sometimes in the space of education, it's just not a lot that are creating technological innovation and receiving the funding for it to be a for-profit entity. And it just makes me think, if we don't figure out how to solve for that, right? 20 years from now, there may not be someone that's sitting where I am that can say, look what has came out, in the last 20 to 30 to 40 years, because, this smart brain was taken serious and they had everything formulated and packaged the right way to raise the capital to innovate, because John, we talk about, you've been passionate about education for a long, long time, right? And I mean, you haven't given up, but I mean, you've had a journey as well of taking L after L, right?
Oh, absolutely. The key to, in my mind, resiliency is the word that comes to my mind when you're in the business of trying to build something new. We were developing an online learning platform 15 years ago. Went to Sand Hill Road to try to raise funding, and it was one of the most humiliating experiences of my career.
Yikes.
It was painful, and a lot of it had to do, I believe, with pattern recognition. Investors typically are used to a certain profile.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you fall outside of the normal parameters, there's this extra layer of complexity when it comes to that. And to drill down a little bit or double click a little bit further on fundraising and building the lab from inception. Number one, having the senior person, the president of the university, to endorse and to open doors, facilitate introductions. What was your process once you had that piece in place? What were the next steps, the sequence of, was it rounding up those corporate partners? What was the methodology, the process? Once you had the idea and kind of a business plan and a vision and buy-in from the university, what happened next?
Well, it's a little bit like starting a company. You need seed investors. You need the first few people to step up to the table. And in our case, it was very much IBM and a few others who stepped up to the table and said, this is stuff we cannot do in our research labs, not because they didn't have the talent or they didn't have the technology, or they just didn't have the chaos and the ability to do stuff that universities can do. And one of the important aspects of the Media Lab was that it was very age integrated, from 18-year-olds to 30-year-olds, graduate students, undergraduate students, everybody. And the 18-year-olds played computers like pianos. They could, look in the other direction and be typing perfectly error-free C code. And the influence that they all had on each other was for me the most delightful part. And when I had visitors, which was as many as 3 or 4 times a day, a corporate visit, 3 or 4 people from science and technology research division of XYZ Corporation would visit, and I'd take them around and just walk them around and introduce them to students and show them. I happened to be in a very, if you will, photogenic type environment, which
Yeah.
where you could look around the room. It was active. There were displays. There were big ones, little ones, things that,
Yeah.
40 years ago was quite
Big deal, right?
big deal.
Big deal.
Now there's one on everybody's desk, but at the time it was quite
Star
special.
Trek.
And the one thing that these corporate executives noticed and would be saying, and I'd think it's about the research and the projects and all of that. No. The one thing they noticed was the enthusiasm of the students. They'd say, why can't my kids be like that?
Yeah.
And I said, well, the enthusiasm comes from doing what you love to do. And nobody here tells anybody what to do. There's no meeting with PowerPoints that somebody decides that this is the research agenda and this is thumbs up, thumbs down. Not at all. You just facilitate and make it available. And the lab operated 24 hours a day. You could go there at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and there would almost be as many people. And it was just a way of life. And that, MIT told me I couldn't have sofas because the students might sleep on them. I said, what do you mean? That's exactly what we want them to do. We want them to sleep on the sofas
And wake up and do
because
it
they'll be
again.
up here all night working. And so it was a bit counter to the procedures of the academic departments at the time.
It's funny you say that because, with the symbol, it was counterintuitive for a lot of HBCUs to really adopt online course work. I think prior to COVID, only 20% of these institutions even offered online degree programs compared to non-HBCUs, which for the audience, historically black college universities. And a big deal was because they didn't have the infrastructure. But as you start to understand the politics of universities, what we found is that not only is the infrastructure sometimes not there, but it's just the extra capital to invest in it. But a lot of professors are kind of thinking, I'm not going to create this for this piece of intellectual property for these universities, and if I'm leaving in 5 years, they're still making money off of it, right? And so we're like trying to solve that problem, or not even trying, we are, because how can you consistently, if you're in these remote regions of the country, one of the things that we think about is how do schools attract talent to teach? And then more important than that, how are they finding talent that is also resonating with industries as they change so fast? So when I think of MIT Media Lab, you had corporate sponsors. I'm pretty sure there was a direct pathway to figure out what are the needs of IBM. Let's share and figure out what are the different traits or trends or industry trends or demands. There's so many universities that just don't have those relationships. And obviously, being digital, it is a really interesting way to solve for that. And that's what we're trying to do.
Speaking of the professors on the campus, we've been exploring and playing with this idea we call the rise of the rock star teacher, or the rise of the pracademic. A pracademic is someone like me. I do not have a PhD in marketing, but I guarantee you that you'd want to learn marketing from me versus someone who has not been in combat producing campaigns and marketing strategies globally and so on. Very curious, your thoughts around the future of education in terms of the sage on the stage model versus a more democratized approach to education or the teacher. And what are your thoughts around what Assemble's doing, which in essence is creating online courses taught by industry experts, people who are at the top of their fields practicing. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that online education, its real value is more bringing education to the most remote, rural, poor places of the world. Because I can't send professors everywhere. There are not enough of them. And the connectivity is so important, especially in early education. You know, I'm talking about primary school, first and second grade. People think kids can't read and write in second grade. Well, they can certainly use a computer in second grade.
Use a tablet at 2 months.
A tablet much younger, exactly. And that's where I, found the connectivity part so important. And that's why I got involved in this project called One Laptop Per Child, where we brought laptops to all countries in the world and to the poorest and the most remote, and in some cases, very large numbers of them. I mean, like several million in one country. If I was running a company, you'd be very happy to sell, a couple of million laptops.
Yeah.
But this was a nonprofit. We weren't, so we were able to go to people, whether they were heads of state or ministers of education, and say, I will do this, you ought to do that, and, you buy this, you do that, and so on and so forth. But they knew that I was a nonprofit, that I was an academic. I was not trying to sell them something. I didn't have shareholders in that sense, and I certainly wasn't benefiting myself. So you found a much, much more open and receptive environment than you might otherwise.
Right, interesting. Do you believe that you can teach creativity?
I believe you can foster creativity. You can amplify creativity. You can bring things out that would otherwise be latent in somebody's abilities, if you will. I don't know if you can teach it in the sense that you can teach skiing or you can teach, a foreign language. But you certainly can amplify it, and you can certainly make people have an appetite to not only be creative, but to be around creative people and to, if you will, suffer the consequences. Creative people are insufferable in many ways. And you've got to buy into that. That is, that's the way it works. If they're not insufferable, they're probably not creative and worth spending time with.
A little quirky, at times. Guilty as charged.
About 10 years ago, I did some research with IDEO, trying to understand the mechanics of innovative leaders, the characteristics. What are the characteristics of truly innovative people? We talked to ballet dancers, we talked to CEOs, we talked to artists, we talked to filmmakers, and we discovered 4 key things, characteristics, that the most remarkable creative people all engendered. And the first one was empathy. The second one was pattern recognition. The third is synthesis, the ability to mash stuff up, peanut butter and jelly, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Unusual combinations, and storytelling skills were the 4 key things after a full year of research and talking to hundreds of really talented, successful people. Those were the 4 key elements. I'm wondering, from your experiences, what do you see as the core characteristics of people who have created true impact in the world?
Well, people create impact in different ways. You have inventors, if you will, people who invent or discover things, and what they've invented and what they've discovered are unto themselves so impactful. But then you have another kind, which I would like to be in the second group, in the sense that I could, think of myself as enabling it and fostering it and encouraging it, and in some cases as simple as funding it, or telling somebody, look, you do what you do best, and I'll do what I do best, which in my case was raising money. I could raise money from almost anybody and anything if you go in with a passionate idea and so on, and you support the people who feel that way about their work, and you don't ask them to write NSF proposals or other things. You just fund them. And I was always disturbed in the science research community that people spend so much time writing proposals, which they hated to do. Mm-hmm. They really wanted to get on and do with the work. Or if they did a very good job writing the proposal, that was the work in the sense that it was all done by the time they submitted the proposal. So I tried to build, and maybe the Media Lab was a good example of a place where people could do that freely and come there and expect the kind of support that they got.
So really what you're describing is the design of culture.
Well, it's the design of multiple cultures, because there isn't a single culture. There are people who, behaved in one sort of, there was a taxonomy of these, which I cannot profess to be able to enumerate right now, but there are many kinds of cultures that you had to be, in the literal sense, multicultural. And I mean that in the sense of intellectual pursuits.
Love it. We're in the process of hopefully creating like a Media Lab 2.0 that we're calling the Latimer Institute, born from the Latimer Fellowship Program. And we're in conversations with Arizona State University to be our mothership. Michael Crow would be our president, and who would open those doors. And we're calling it inclusive innovation. Inclusive innovation, to me, is you can't invent the future if you don't have multiple points of view, attack vectors of all these different perspectives. Mm-hmm. What are your views and your thoughts around the idea of inclusive innovation and diversity when you're in the business of inventing the future?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, though you didn't say it this way, and that is that point of view is more important than IQ. That the way you look at something and the way you see it and the way you look around the corners is really important, because metaphors really define intelligence. And if you put yourself in a position to experience metaphors at various levels, and I believe that in terms of multiculturals. When I went to school, there were 200 kids in the school, but they were from 190 countries, or not 190, 150 countries from all over the world. It was just an environment of multiple cultures. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, was perhaps the best part of my education and the strongest part of my education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shifting gears for a second. When designing a curriculum that's intended to become almost like a factory of problem solvers, we're exploring a number of different approaches. We're really compelled by the idea of bespoke education, which I believe artificial intelligence will make possible, where every single student has a bespoke curriculum specifically tailored to their learning styles and so on. We're very excited about the possibilities of VR and the idea of immersive we're calling them virtual field trips and immersive experience. The research shows that content retention in immersive environments is 70% greater than consuming in a 2D format. We're very excited about this idea of learning from industry practitioners like the Assemble.fyi platform. We're very excited about the idea of what we're calling learning at the speed of social. So if a typical textbook
Yeah.
is a 5-year process before they are renewed, well, in the innovation world, things are moving much faster than the speed of publishing.
Right.
We're imagining that there is no textbook in the future and that your textbook is a data feed of information from today. Your homework assignment is this is what happened yesterday. What are some other ideas or thoughts that you may have when you think about what's the future of a learning platform?
Yeah, that's a good question.
To find that answer, and I don't have it, but I can tell you where I would look. And I would look very hard at parts of the world that don't have the opportunities we have, don't have the infrastructure, don't have the, whatever takes to have an advanced society with institutions like MIT and Harvard and so on. But what about the rest of the world? And the energy, the intellectual energy, is in the people and in their accomplishments. And not everybody's going to be a Nobel Prize winner, but they can all sure try to be. And we can hope that all of our kids in the classroom, if we have classrooms, have that in common. And what I found with the most endearing part of what I found with one laptop per child was that the kids ended up teaching their teachers, taking the laptops home, showing their parents, getting their parents. A couple of examples that we followed relatively carefully was where kids who had illiterate parents would bring the laptops home and over time taught their parents how to read and write. And I thought, boy, that puts goosebumps on my goosebumps when I hear that and when I saw that. And so that's the part that I look most fondly at.
Yeah. I second that. I was going to say, we like, even I try to be careful with AI, right? Like, it's just the entire venture community, and even as you keep up with ed tech, all the bigger players, I think it's AI. But sometimes you have to take a step back and assess everything that's been created and look at groups, whether it's in remote regions of the world or actually in this country, that have been overlooked. And I try to be very intentional about that because it's two things that can happen. A, they will be forgotten and they'll never catch up. Or as we create this next wave of innovation, the same patterns will happen all over again, right? And so laptops, 85% of HBCUs do not have broadband internet access. So when you're thinking about a group of institutions that produce over 80% of a community's doctors and lawyers and scientists, for me, it means that there is an amazing opportunity to look at what's not been presented, and then how to use some of the technology and the digital tools that we have access to leapfrog, right? Because if these outcomes are being presented and happening with the lack of infrastructure and resources, imagine what could happen if innovation is brought to them through the lens of this group first, right? Not just we're going to create something for MIT or Harvard, and then we're going to pass it down to those that don't have. And so I think just even going back to the first question about, diversity of thought, a lot of times the innovation isn't really putting underrepresented populations first. It's a second thought. It's just market share at the end of the day, you know? And you get a lot of pushback when you reverse engineer that, but it really means that you can solve some really hard problems. And so that's just what I'm really, really passionate about. I got a good question for you, Nick. What was one of the first moments where you were just at the Media Lab and you thought like, wow, this is really something, like we've created something? Was it seeing a student go on to create a company, or was it getting the first patent in the school's name, or?
I'm not sure if there was a moment of that sort, because, you know, each day had multiples of those in the sense that my job at the end was almost like a tour guide. And so I would take people and show them things and what I found over time is that I would see things that I never saw. And, you know, I thought I was showing people stuff that I knew about, and then I realized that as I'm showing people, you know, this isn't stuff I'd ever heard before. But that isn't, you know, because I had been away for 3 months. It's because I had been away for 24 hours.
Wow.
And, you know, it just happened so fast, and there was so much activity. And at the end, you know, the Media Lab was pretty big, and you could walk on different floors, and you could go at different times. I had one sponsor who I told, you know, so many times that the Media Lab was 24 hours a day. This guy happened to be, at the time, the richest man in the world, named Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim comes to my house for dinner in Boston, and after dinner he says, you know, you keep telling me the Media Lab is open 24 hours, and, you know, it's almost midnight now. Let's go. You know, we had his limos parked outside, and I sat, you know, it's not as if you can call up somebody and do something. We get in, we go over to the Media Lab. It was popping with people. It was full of people. And I said, bless your hearts, you know. And he was so impressed that it really was 24 hours. And it really was, that he'd done, you know, he made a very generous gift the next day, which we were very grateful for. But it was because the energy was there, the activity was there, and it wasn't just me saying it.
Yeah.
And if you called my bluff, which I was a little worried driving over there, you know, will there be people? Will there not be people? Who knows?
And you didn't have cell phones back then to be like, fill the room.
We couldn't quite give any advance notice. So that was gratifying.
That is a unique moment. That's a story that I never even heard.
Yeah, great story. Amazing. What are your views around this idea of gamification? Gamification in the education world. Have you had any experience looking at that?
You know, the experience we had with games in education was far weaker than the experience we had with the tools to make those games. And that if you gave a kid a game, they might play it. But if you gave the kids software that they could write games for the kid sitting beside them or for somebody else, that was the most powerful part. And computer programming in general, which I think is something everybody should learn and it should be part of it, is the closest we come to thinking about thinking. You think about it for a moment. When you write a computer program, you've, shall we say, decomposed something into an algorithm, and you write the instructions for it to be executed. And what's important is that computer programs never work the first time. At least none I've ever written. And so what you do is you go and you debug the program. You fix the errors. Now, how do you fix errors? The way you fix an error is you look at the behavior. In other words, you wanted it to do X and it does Y, and you look at what it does to help you figure out how to make it do what you want to do. And it doesn't take long. While kids may not say this explicitly for them to realize that's kind of what they do too. That's how they learn. Their learning is a process of debugging, which might be trying and trial and error, and even at very young ages when things fall, and so you learn a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious about mentorship. Without having people in your orbit, in your community that can help you, help guide you, provide honest feedback, make introductions to other like-minded people. I think it's an extremely lonely business, the innovation business, and to not have mentors and people who are deeply passionate and committed to helping you grow. I think it's a very tough. I think it's a very, very tough world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your experiences with mentors, people who took you under the wing and gave you that guidance, maybe a shortcut to avoiding a pitfall.
Most often, the guidance was permission. It wasn't so much a critique where you'd say, well, if you go slightly to the left or the right, you might see it faster. It was permission to go, keep going, and encouraging you to try things. And there's an expression, that something is a stupid question. There are no stupid questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There are questions and there are answers and you go in. It's just the license to be freewheeling is absolutely invaluable. And people have to not confuse that with chaotic. You just don't go to let's say a classroom in the traditional sense and total chaos.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the acceptance that probably maybe even the only way to learn is to experiment, to try things. Now, that certainly isn't true in everything, but it's true in most things. And if you give people the opportunity to try and to fail and to learn from their experiences, and this is why grading things in papers, tests, and so on is often very counterproductive because, it's not the absolute value. And some things it may be. I probably want airline pilots to learn things in a pretty rote fashion. But, most of the things you're talking about are about imagination and wonder and doing things that are, not necessarily normal or accepted. They're different. And let's celebrate the differences.
Mm-hmm. Cheers to that.
So I think if we can take away, we don't know what the future of education is, but you can sure play a role in it by fostering a innovative setting, embracing diversity of thought, creating an environment where it's okay to fail and it's okay to be chaotic, and having people that open doors and fund it early on. And it's not a one thing. It's just AI or it's going to be this specific thing we don't know. And that's the whole point. Create this huge pot of experiments and see what comes out of it, And I guess we're just trying to play a role in it, right? Or not even trying. We are. We're playing a role in it.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're playing a role.
Exactly. I mean, we're in a political climate right now where there's actual talk of abolishing the Department of Education.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela said the only way that a society can move forward is through investment in education.
the tools that we have available to us today allow us to democratize knowledge that typically was locked up inside the ivory towers of these big institutions. And so it becomes like one laptop per child. I think that the average IQ of people in general will increase by 15 or 20 or 30 points in the future as the access to high quality knowledge becomes more available, and the tools like AI make it maybe easier for people to digest information or give them customized information. But I'm just very curious about, did you imagine that the Media Lab would be a physical hub with 800 people in it that could eventually push out to touch even more people? Or did you always have it in an intention to keep it a more intimate kind of closed community?
Well, remember, in the academic environment, you are turning over, if you will, 20% of your employees per year. In other words, they graduate and new ones come in. And I really did think of my students as employees in the sense that I funded them all and they were working on projects that were their own projects. But you'd lose 20% every year. And the 20% you would lose because they graduated and moved on into life were the ones that were the most experienced by definition.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this churn. And you also had another phenomenon which is not unique to MIT, but it's pretty different in the sense that we were 35% foreign students. And that 35% was a different demographic when I was a student than it was later, but it was always roughly 30, not by any kind of admissions rule. There wasn't a quota system, but you ended up with roughly 35-40% of your students being from foreign countries. That makes such a difference, such an enormous difference, because they're people who are not like you. And they come from places, do things you don't do, and when that all gets mixed up together, that's a great formula for creating an environment that generates ideas. And you can almost do it blind. You can almost just take a lot of people with such diverse backgrounds and give them a great deal of opportunity, and the chances of something really interesting coming out is pretty high.
You should tell Silicon Valley that. I did this chart one time of probably the second largest fund in education. And I think they maybe have like 200 companies in their portfolio. I'll have to show it to you after this. And I just was, bored. And I did a chart of every company and the founders. And there was like, out of all it was like 185 white males, 12 founders of, Indian descent. And there was like 3 African Americans. And I always have a problem with that because I go, this world is so huge. It's just very hard for me to believe that someone that has a PhD in academia from Harvard and then went to, Williams and Mary know what's best for all students, And so how can we really be serious about just whether it's the national IQ level or college rates or the outcomes of students? How can we be serious when only one side or perspective is designing the solutions for everyone? That's just so crazy to me. I know we got to wrap up.
I just wanted one or two other questions.
Yeah.
So I read recently that about 500 universities and colleges in this country have gone out of business in the last 6-7 years. And that trend is expected to continue. The traditional universities are, generally speaking, pretty poorly run operations. But what's your view around the future of higher education if these traditional institutions are closing at
One per
alarming
week.
rates.
One per week in America.
Alarming rates. What does this look like? What does this future look like in your mind?
Well, I have to preface my answer by saying that I know we're a university, and I was in a university, and I benefited from being in the academic world. But I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as a research organization that was driven by the ideas that came from within instead of from without. And that unto itself was a privilege. And so starting off with a privilege, which I did personally, I grew up in a privileged environment, you've got to take that privilege and do something with it. Or you can use a lot of your energy to get to, in some sense, where I started. And I have great admiration for people who then go on and do these amazing things like you guys. It's incredible what you've done. And I think we have to not just celebrate that, but we've got to make sure that that happens as far and as rapidly and as strongly, if you will, as humanly possible. And the elitism of ideas doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, yes, physicists want to be with physicists, and great physicists want to be with great physicists, and if you call that elite, then so be it, but that's the way it is. And I found that an environment like MIT, it wasn't the privilege of MIT, it was the other people who, if you will, like I, happened to be there. And you that's what you really benefit from. And then I tried, when I did the Media Lab, to build an environment that fostered that.
Yeah.
And it's not too hard. Say giving permission is not that hard.
Yeah, I mean, the big takeaway from our conversation today, Nicholas, is your undying sense of optimism. We actually met through Mr. Quincy Jones, and one day I went to his office when I worked for him, and I asked him, what's your mission in life? What's the mission of the company? What's your personal mission in life? And the man said, my mission in life is to inject optimism into the world. That's it. That is my role. That's my purpose. I thought I was going to start crying. I thought that was the most beautiful and elegant self-definition. And as we conclude, I just wanted to say that I deeply value our friendship, and it's your sense of optimism and the generosity of spirit to build environments that foster creativity and well springs of inspiration. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your work and the cultural contributions that you have created are deeply, deeply meaningful and purposeful. And we want to ride with you on this journey as we continue to dream about the future of knowledge exchange and the future of education. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Assemble will have a wing called Negroponte Hall, so that's how we'll end it that way, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.